Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Spicy Coding Academy, where we do some walkthroughs with some free code camp. And we will be starting where we left off, accessing nested arrays. Now, again, if you're enjoying this and you would love to join a community of coders, join our academy. We have a tiny cohort where we not only do this, but we add FUN to the max. We're talking trivia, games, challenges, competition, and most importantly, a lot of laughter. So if you're enjoying this, definitely check out the sign up below, because there is only so much that can sign up before we gotta go. Alright, so let's get into it. As we have seen in earlier examples, objects can contain both nested objects and nested arrays. Similar to accessing nested objects, array bracket notation can be chained to access nested arrays. So they provide an example, const our pets. So we got this array, and then we have two nested objects. And if you remember, this is the property, and this is the value. And then also we have another nested array with this property and multiple values within this array. Now it says, alright, our pets 0.names 1. So it means, okay, go into our pets. Alright, we're going to go into our pets. Go under the index 0. So remember, with programming, any array starts at index 0. It doesn't start at 1, it starts at 0. So this is going to be 0, and then this is going to be index 1. So it's saying go to index 0 in our pet. So we're going to go into here. And then it says now go into .names 1. So .names, okay, let's go into names, and then 1. If this is 0, because the indexes start with 0 in programming for most, if not all languages, but definitely JavaScript. And this is going to be 1, and it will access Fluffy. Also notice how there is no comma right here or comma right here. There is a comma at the end of the object and a comma at the second to last value. And then it says our pets 1. Okay, so let's go to our pets. And let's go to 1. So this is 0. This is the object at the index 0. And then this is the object at the index 1. And then it says, all right, now let's do names at the index 0. So let's go into names at the index 0, because this is an array, and we get spot. And then as you can see, it says that below. Now it says, using dot and bracket notation, set the variable second tree to the second item in the trees list from the myPlants object. So I want you to think about this for a hot minute before I give you away the answer. We have const myPlants, which is an array of objects. We got one object here that starts with an index of 0. And then we have a second object here, which is at the index 1. And then the array ends with a little semicolon. Now it says using dot and bracket notation. And remember, dot and bracket notation, those are the two things we're working with. It wants us to set the variable second tree right here, which has a const at the beginning, which means, hey, this value is not going to change. For this variable, we are going to keep it this value, because this sucker is a const, and const means constant, in case anyone needed a little rebuff. So, it says set the variable second tree to the second item in the trees list from the myPlants object. So remember, when we're doing arrays, this is the first item, it's indexed at 0. And this is the second item, which is indexed at 1. So fir would be 0, pine would be 1, birch would be 2. So it says const second tree. Okay. Now it says set the variable to the second item in the trees list. So the trees list is this one. And the trees list, so the type is trees. The list is right here. So it wants us to go into this object, this array of objects, myPlants. So we have to say, hey computer, hey buddy, we're gonna go into my plants. You gotta let them know which array of objects you're gonna go into. And then it wants us to make note of which object. So similar to this one, is it the first one or the second one? Well, trees is down here, so it's going to be the second one. And if we know the first one is 0, in order to index it and say, hey, which one, then the second one is going to be 1. So we're going to put a fun 1 in there. Now we want to go down here. We're like, okay, now we've accessed this object within this array of objects, and we are going to go into list. So we want to mention list because that's the one we're going into. Now I want you to guess which one we're going to put. Are we going to put 0, 1, or 2? Well, if it says the second item, I'll give you a little hint. This is the second item. Which one do you think we're going to choose? If you guessed 1, you are correct, Damunda. And we can double check with that because look, Palawak, it hits. So I did a little work on this before because there was a lot of writing and a lot of typing. But we will work through this together. Don't worry, this is a little long, but we got this. We got this in the bag. Record collection. You are given an object literal representing a part of your musical album collection. Each album has a unique ID number as its key. So this is the key, and several other properties. These are the properties on the left side. Not all albums have complete information. So this is the ID or the key. These are the properties on the left, and these are the values on the right. And anything in the curly braces is an object, an objecto. So you start with an update records function that takes an object literal. So this is our update record collection. This is an object of objects. Okay. So you see where it says equals curly brace? It isn't this. It's this. So it's an object of objects. Imagine like the key and value system, like a dictionary. Essentially, it's using these as the IDs in order to be able to determine which one is which. So an object of objects. And then down here, it says we have the update records function. Update records function because it wants us to update it because not all of these are filled out. As you can see, this one's filled out, album title, artist, tracks, album title, artist, tracks. But then, oh, shoot, there's no tracks here. And then, oh, wait, no, there's no album title either. And then, oh, shoot, there's no tracks here and there's no artist. So it's saying, hey, you're going to create a function that will fill in this information. So it says, it takes an object literal records containing the musical album collection and ID, a prop like artists or tracks, and a value. Complete the function using the rules below to modify the object passed to the function. So your function must always return the entire record collection object, which we will make sure to do. But let's start with the first line. Function, we got records, ID, prop, and value. It says if prop isn't tracks and value isn't an empty string, update or set that album's prop to value. So remember, isn't is a particular operator. I'll give you a little hint. There's two things that always to look at when you have directions. Does it start with an if? Does it start with a comparison operator? What does it want? And right now we see the if and we see, okay, comparison operator is needed because we need to tell if it is or isn't tracks. So knowing that, what do you think we're going to need? We're going to compare, okay, if prop isn't tracks, so we're going to need something to compare it to. And then we got an and if you remember from our previous lessons, there's a certain operator comparison that we use, ampersand, two ampersands that we use in order to create a conjunction. And when it's two ampersands, it means that both of them have to be true in order for something to return true. If one of them is false with this, then it comes back as false and it doesn't return what you want it to return. So knowing that, this is what that stands for. Value isn't an empty string. Okay, so isn't, we're going to do another comparison. So I want you to try this out before I show you the answer too, okay? So isn't an empty string. We know what an empty string looks like, right? Boom. Update or set that album's prop to value. We want to be able to set something to a particular value. We want prop to be set to a value. And just like the previous lesson, we want to be able to know how to access that, how to access prop and value. So I'll give you a second to create what you got, that little if statement with the isn'ts and the and the isn'ts, and then the update. You want it to do something. If condition, you want it to do something if all of them work. So once you did that, let's take a look. If prop is not equal to tracks, and we got that ampersand, value is not equal to an empty string, what do we want it to do? Update or set that album's prop to value. So we're going to go into records. Up here, we're going to go into records, and we're going to put in ID. So go in downtown to ID, and then we're going to go into prop, and we're going to put in that value. We want to put in the value that is missing. So if there's no tracks, well, we want to create that track. We want to make sure it's populated. And if the value, if there's nothing there, if there's no string and there's no tracks, well, okay, we want to create it. We want to populate this with information. We want it to be filled just like this one is. It has album title, artist, and track. So we're saying, hey, if there's no tracks, and the value is an empty string, if prop does not equal tracks and there is an empty string, if we do not have the property tracks and there is no value, okay, make one. Go into ID, go into prop, and put the value there. So we're quite literally creating the value. We're like, okay, put it there, boom. Next one. If props is tracks, but the album doesn't have a tracks property, create an empty array and add value to it. So let's break this down. So if props is tracks, well, we did not equals for this, so maybe we will do an if statement with comparison of is as in equal, or equal, but the album doesn't have a tracks property. So, but the album doesn't have a tracks property, so does not equal tracks. Create an empty array, which we know are the bracket. We got those. It looks like this. This is what an array looks like, and add value to it. So we want to add value to it. So if prop is tracks, so prop does exist, but the album doesn't have a tracks property, create an empty array and add value to it. Okay, so we're gonna go down and do that. So there's a tracks, but the records ID.hasOwn property is false. This is just a fancy way of saying, hey, there's no value. Buddy, there's no value. And we look back over here, it says album doesn't have a tracks property, create an empty array and add value to it. So if it's false, we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to make it an array. So when we do this, we creating an empty array, and we're adding the value inside the array. Because if you look at tracks, there are arrays for the tracks. For artists, it's just a string. For album title, it's just a string. But for tracks, we want to create an array. So up here, it's if prop does not equal tracks and the value is not a string, then we're just going to, oh my god, this thing is crazy. We're just going to add the value. So we want to add the value. We don't have to worry about creating an array because it's not tracks, and tracks creates the array. It's just a string. We can just add the string directly to the prop. Because remember, these are IDs and properties. That's why we're calling ID and prop. And the reason why we're saying not tracks is because we don't want it to add to tracks because tracks is an array. And this, we want to just add the value because we're just wanting to add strings. But down here, we want to add an array for tracks because the other ones are arrays. This is an array right here. So that's why we're checking and we're saying, okay, if the prop is equal to tracks, if the prop is tracks, and the record's ID has on property tracks equals false, as in there's no value, when you look in and there's nothing in there, we're going to create an empty array and place the value inside of that empty array, whatever that value might be. Hopefully that makes a little more sense. I know it can look confusing at first, but once we talk about it a few times, 2, 3, 4 times, it starts to blend in, bend in, patterns are created. Just remember that. It starts to blend in, bend in, and patterns are created. All right. The next one. We're almost done, guys. We're doing great. If prop is tracks and value isn't an empty string, as in there's stuff already in there, we're going to add the value to the end of the album's existing tracks array. So like, for example, there's stuff already in this tracks. Okay, so if prop is tracks, so if tracks exists and there's an array with values in it, it's not an empty string, then we want to add the value to the very end, which means we most likely will, I'll let you guess, add a certain thing to do so to our, it's a, do you remember? Dot push. Good job. Adds it to the end. Yep. So we do that, and value to the end of the album's existing array. So we got that if statement that we got to do. We have a comparison operator if props equals tracks. And we got that ampersand. Value isn't an empty string. Value is not. So we have another comparison operator. We know what a string looks like. Add that value to the end of the album's existing tracks array. So we're going to add it to the end. So props equals tracks equals tracks, ampersand, and the value isn't a string, isn't an empty string. We're going to add the value. We're going to say exactly where we want it, records, ID, it's a prop, and we're going to push the value on. So when we say we want it to check for tracks, this is where we want to say, okay, if prop equals tracks, this is where we're gonna put it. We're gonna put it under the property that says tracks. So that's where we cover it. And then records ID prop will automatically push that value to the end of the tracks because we said in our if statement where we wanted it. We said, hey, if it equals tracks, put it there. That's why this can be a little more generic, is because we're very specific where we want it put. Either it's not equal to tracks, put it there, or it is equal to tracks, find tracks and put it in there. And then the value is not equal to an empty string, put it at the end. Dot push value puts it at the end. The last one, if value is an empty string, delete the given property from the album. So if the value is an empty string, as in there's nothing in there, delete the property. Because what's the point of having a property if there's no value? So if we just have properties, for example, let's say it's just like this, it's saying, hey, if this exists in our object of objects, just delete the sucker. Get rid of it. It ain't worth it. And notice how this does not have a comma because it's the last one. This has a semicolon. So it says, hey, if the value is an empty string, delete that sucker. Records, ID, prop. It doesn't matter if it's album title, tracks, or artists. If it's empty, delete it. That's why we don't specify if it's tracks or if it's not tracks, because we just want any of them without a value to be deleted. And then remember, it says your function must always return the entire record collection object. So you want to return the entire record. So that's why we say return records. And if you look up here, what does records represent? It represents the entire record collection object. Remember, each parameter in here represents a generic part of this record collection object. Records represents the entire thing. ID represents this. Prop represents this. And value represents whatever is stored in the prop. So, hopefully, that makes more sense. Then what it's doing down here is it's calling the function update records, which we created, and you see where each of these generic parameters are. They're each going to hold a value in relation to what would be considered up here. So this is string, array of strings. So we have our record collection object, which represents the whole one. The ID, the ID is a number. So ID is number, records is the whole collection, and then we have prop, which is a string, and value, which is a string. And once we do that, it's going to check to make sure that it does as it's supposed to. And if you want to see those checks more so, you can see artist should be the string ABBA. After update records, record collection 5439 tracks, Take a Chance on Me, track should have the string Take a Chance on Me as the last and only element. So if we were to go to 5439, which is right here, and it says Take a Chance on Me, track should have the string Take a Chance on Me. So it created a track with the string Take a Chance on Me. After update records, record collection 2548, artist, empty string, artist should not be set because look, there's nothing there. After update records, record collection 1245, tracks, addicted to love, track should have the string addicted to love as the last element. So 1245, for the last element, it should be addicted to love. So hopefully that made sense. I know this is a little longer than we expected. Oh, I thought it was going to be a little shorter, but we really had to go in and explain this sucker because let me tell you, sometimes it takes a few times, but don't worry because this JavaScript is all about learning patterns, pattern recognition, pattern remembrance. The more you recognize the patterns, the easier it is to remember it and to regurgitate it when you yourself are a programmer for an awesome job. That is the end of this. So if you enjoyed, definitely smash that like button. Subscribe to our content because we not only do this, but we also do it fun. So that's all we got for tonight. Enjoy yourselves. Have a wonderful rest of the night. Y'all deserve it. Good night.